Today, as Katie mentioned, this is the first Sunday of Advent, and there's a number of things that have changed, highlighting the season of Advent. If you'll notice, the colors have changed. We're wearing purple stoles. There's a purple banner over here. Why? Because purple speaks to royalty. And anytime we see purple, it's to awaken the senses to the fact that we are preparing our hearts for the coming of the King, because King Jesus is royal. And so when we see purple, we say we need to prepare our hearts so as to awaken our senses. The songs that we sing, the content within the songs are all speaking about the Lord's second coming. When we talk about Advent, we're not only celebrating his first coming, because he came, but we're also celebrating his second coming, because he is surely coming. He's coming with the clouds. He's coming in the clouds. God's divine presence is coming. And so we need to prepare our hearts for the coming of the King. So the content within the songs, but then you also have, the songs have a minor key to them, most of them. Why? Because minor key brings within us a desire for resolution to the major key. And as we're living between the two advents of the first coming of Christ and the second coming of Jesus, there's a longing and an ache within our own heart to see the resolution come. And the resolution will certainly come when Jesus comes. So the songs are in a minor key. And you also see within our liturgy, it reflects the Advent season, but also Advent meaning coming, again, celebrating the first coming, but also preparing our hearts for the second coming. What Katie and I the clergy are in robes. Now, why? Now, Advent begins the church calendar. When we celebrate Advent, what we're saying is, again, preparation for the coming of the King. Then we look at Christmas, or what a better term is incarnation. What we celebrate in the Christmas season is not Christmas. We celebrate the incarnation that Jesus Christ has come among us. So parents, stop calling it Christmas. Tell your kids we're going to celebrate the incarnation. That's what we're celebrating, the incarnation, Jesus coming among us. And then we celebrate the epiphany, that the message, the gospel is going forth to the world. And then we go into Lent, which is the preparation of Jesus suffering and dying for us, leading up into Holy Week, Good Friday. We remember that Christ died on the cross for our sins. And then it culminates into Resurrection Sunday, when we celebrate that death no longer has a hold on him. And because we put our trust in him, made like him, we will rise, resurrection. And then that goes into Pentecost, where we celebrate the coming of the Holy Spirit on the church, that we as a church are to go out into a lost and broken world, not self-empowered, but God-empowered, because the Holy Spirit's in us. And what begins all of that is Advent. But throughout the entire thing, it's the proclamation that Jesus Christ is the King of Kings. And so why do we wear robes? It's living into the Revelation 1, that we are called a kingdom and priests. That yes, there are vocational priests and deacons, but this is to be a visual that we are all called to service. We are all called to participate as a part of the priesthood of believers, that we are a part of the kingdom and the priesthood of believers. That's what we're called to. So when you see the robes, that's what it's to awaken within us. So that's the season of Advent. And it's all pointing to the fact that our hearts are called to be prepared for his second coming. And that's what we're going to be looking at this week, next week, and then also December 17th. What does it mean to be a people prepared for the coming of the King? How do we prepare for the coming of the King? This week, we're going to look at one word. Next week, we're going to look at another word. But both of those words are about how we prepare. How do we become a people prepared for the coming of the King? Now, preparation is absolutely essential. We need to be prepared. When I was in college and I felt like the Lord was leading me into a seminary, and what a seminary is basically Bible training for pastors, that they understand a deeper way on the Word. You learn more of the history. You learn how to pull out of the Word what the Word is actually saying and communicate it. And so that's what a seminary is. It's training for pastors. And as I was kind of discerning where to go for seminary, there's a place in Dallas, a place in California, a place in Massachusetts, Chicago, Deerfield, Illinois, and then also Denver Seminary. I did not know where the Lord was leading. And so what I thought I'd do is take a prayer and fasting day, 3 days in the wilderness, just to pray and fast about, Lord, where are you leading me to? Now, I hadn't done much hiking up to that point. I didn't have very much camping gear, and I really didn't know how to do it. So what I did was, I got in my car, my VW Bug, went up to the Poudre Canyon, because I was living in Fort Collins at the time, went up to the Poudre Canyon, parked my car, got out, and I just started walking. Now keep in mind, this was early spring. I had in my backpack a tent that didn't have a very good rain cover. I had a backpack that didn't have a rain cover. I had one sweatshirt, a little bit of rain gear, socks, my Bible, and a journal and a pen. and a flashlight that I found out later that didn't work. I did not have any food, but I had one Nalgene bottle full of water. That's all I had, because I wanted to take 3 days of prayer and fasting to discern, Lord, where are you leading me to go to seminary? So I pulled off, parked, started walking up, didn't have a map, didn't have a compass, had no clue where I was going. Started hiking up. About 2 hours into the hike, it started to rain. I put on my rain jacket, they didn't work. 2 hours after that, it started to snow. And then it began to get dark. And then I realized to myself, I'm becoming pretty miserable here because I'm cold, I'm really, really hungry, and I have no clue where I'm at. So I unpacked my bag. I took out my tent that was just soaked. I set it up. I took out my sleeping bag that was just absolutely soaked, pulled it out. I took everything in, put it in my tent, and everything was just soaked down all the way through. Now, I was also camping on a little bit of a slope. So what happened was, as it snowed and rained throughout the night, it filled up my tent with water. It just kind of filled it up. And so I woke up in water. And actually, I didn't wake up because I didn't sleep throughout the entire night. I just felt how miserable I am through this experience because I was hungry, I was cold. And as soon as the sun came out, I said, I'm getting out of here. I'm going home. I'm going to eat a big meal, and I'm going to sleep in a warm bed. And as I was walking down, I thought, this thing was an utter failure. I didn't discern where the Lord had been leading me. The only thing I could think about was myself. I wasn't thinking about the Lord. I'm in the same place as I was before. This was an utter failure. Why? Because I wasn't prepared. And if that's true of a 3-day prayer and fasting retreat, how much more true is it of eternity? We are called to be prepared. Because if we're not prepared, the consequences are eternally devastating. So, for we as a church, as we prepare for the coming of the King, the second coming, how do we become a people prepared? Let's look. Mark chapter 13, and we're going to start in verse 24. And as you're going to there, Mark chapter 13, verse 24, I want to give a little bit of a backdrop. The first is this, is that Jesus' ministry, he's probably on Wednesday of Holy Week, which means he only has 1 or 2 days left before he is crucified. The backdrop or the context is that he was just speaking or preaching around the temple. If you know anything about the temple, it was a beautiful, magnificent building. It took about 46 years to rebuild. It was Herod's temple. And he poured a lot of money into it. The building was just extravagant. It had 9 huge doors with a veneer of gold, brass, and silver, so it could be seen from miles around. And because it sat up on a hill, it had these big, huge stones. It was a statement to the Roman world of what is there, and you could see it all around. The other thing that you would have is about 10,000 people working for 46 years to make it what it was. It was considered one of the Roman wonders of the world during that time. Not only did it take 46 years to build, and the reason why is because you had these huge blocks of stone that were transported from the quarry to the place where the site was, and these stones were as big as railroad cars. Huge. It was a magnificent building. And Jesus has just left there. And as he's leaving, he makes a profound statement. He says, there is a time coming when not one stone will be on another. Because it's in response to the disciples' statement of, isn't this such a beautiful building? I mean, look at it. It's magnificent. And Jesus says, I tell you, there will come a day where when not one stone will be left on another, everything will be thrown down. And it's in light of that context that the disciples ask 2 significant questions. And they're found in Matthew chapter 24 and also at the very beginning of Mark 13. And the disciples asked this. As Jesus was sitting on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately. Tell us, they said, when will this happen? When will what happen? The destruction of the temple. When will this happen? And what will be the sign of your coming of the end of the age? So they asked 2 questions. When will the temple be destroyed? And then when will you come back again? You see the same question at the very beginning of Mark chapter 13. As Jesus is sitting on the Mount of Olives opposite the temple, Peter, James, John, and Andrew asked him privately, tell us, when will these things happen? Now, throughout Mark 13, Matthew 24, and Luke chapter 21, you see this dialogue taking place that's going back and forth between the destruction of the temple and the second coming of the Son of Man. But what Jesus does is he leverages and uses the destruction of the temple and the preparation for the destruction of the temple with the ultimate preparation of the second coming of the Son of Man. So he moves on from the destruction of the temple to highlight the point that he wants to make. Notice, this just isn't a prophetic word. This is a pastoral word. He's saying, I am coming back again, and this is how you will prepare. So when you read this passage, he's going back and forth between when the destruction of the temple will be and how do we prepare for the second coming of the King. Keep that in mind. Verse 24. But in those days following that distress, The sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light. The stars will fall from the sky, and the heavenly bodies will be shaken. Now, this is drastic language. What is causing the dissolution of the cosmic structures? What is causing the stars to fall and the earth to be shaken? What is heavy enough to cause the planets to shake? What is glorious enough and weighty enough to cause the earth to rumble? It has to be more great and more glorious and more weighty than the earth itself, or even the cosmos itself. One of the things my 5-year-old daughter loves to do, she never walks anywhere. She always runs. So in her house, she never goes from the kitchen to the dining room by walking. She runs there. And when she runs, everything begins to shake. The pictures on the wall, the pots or the lamp on the table. Why? Because hope is heavier than the lamps. Hope is heavier than the bowls. Hope, when she runs, is heavier than the pictures up on the wall. Because she is heavier, because she's weightier, everything shakes. Question: what is heavy enough and weighty enough, more glorious than the stars of the sky, the cosmos itself, and yes, the earth? It's God himself. He's coming. And this is what Isaiah predicts in chapter 40, where he says, the valleys will be raised up, the mountains will be lowered. All of earth will be reoriented. Why? Because the coming of the King. What is so glorious and great that the whole earth is reoriented? In fact, the entire cosmos restructured? It's the coming of the King, great and glorious. Verse 26 and 27, at that time people will see the Son of Man coming in the clouds. We talked about that last week, with great power and glory. And he will send his angels and gather his elect. That is, those who have faithfully responded to the gospel. He'll gather the elect from the four winds, from the winds of the earth to the ends of the earth, and to the ends of the heavens. He'll gather them together. But who is this one? It's the one who is the Son of Man, who comes in the clouds. And as we talked about last week, this is God himself. This is Jesus bringing in and ushering in his very presence. Now, when the presence of God comes, things change. Because if you remember in Genesis chapter 1, 2, and 3, there was peace. There was the absence of hostility and enmity. Why? Presence of God. There was the absence of anything that was twisted. The absence of anything that was crooked, the absence of anything that was distorted. Why? Because the presence of God was there. Sudden infant death syndrome, gone, not present. Sickness, gone, not present. Bodies falling apart, not present. Injustice, not present. Sexism, racism, war, not present. Why? Because the full glory of the King is here. And when the full glory of the King comes, there is shalom, there is peace, there is goodness, there is glory. We go on to read in verse 28 and 30. Now learn this lesson from the fig tree. As soon as its twigs get tender and its leaves come out, you know that the summer is near. Even so, when you see these things happening, you know that it is near, right at the door. Question. He's making a transition, talking about the heavens shaking, and who can prepare for that? Talks about his glory and presence coming. Who can prepare for that? But then he makes a transition and talks about a fig tree. A couple observations. First, the fig tree was one of the few deciduous trees in Palestine. The evergreen, the oak, and the olive tree all kept its leaves throughout the year. The fig tree was one of the rare trees that lost its leaves in the winter and then gained new ones back in the spring going into the summer. And so what Jesus is saying here is this: when you see the fig tree, the new life beginning to sprout out, you know that summer is near because the new growth is coming through. And he's using that as an illustration. And then he goes on to say, even so, when you see these things happening. Again, question, what are these things? Is it the second coming or is it the temple? What Jesus is doing, he is answering the question that took place at the very beginning of Matthew chapter 24 and Mark 13, when he says, the disciples asking, tell us when these things will happen, in response to the question about the temple. When will these things happen? And Jesus says, when the fig tree begins to come out, when it begins to get new leaves, you know that the day is near. This is important because he's going to draw a contrast in just a bit to highlight the big idea of what he wants to drive home to his hearers. Truly, I tell you, this generation will certainly not pass away until all these things have happened. And then he goes on to say in verse 32, but about that day or hour, no one knows. Now that word, that first word in the original language is the strongest comparison and contrasting word that you can use. What he's saying is in regards to the destruction of the temple, there will be signs. You will have an understanding of that day, but about the second coming, you will not know. About the second coming, in comparison to this, you won't know the day. You won't know the hour. And he goes on to say, not even the angels in heaven nor the Son, but only the Father. Be on guard, be alert. You do not know when that time will come. It is like a man going away. He leaves his house and puts his servants in charge, each with their assigned task, and tells the one at the door to keep watch. Therefore keep watch, because you do not know when the owner of the house will come back. You do not know, whether in the evening or at midnight, or when the rooster crows or at the dawn. If he comes suddenly, do not let him find you sleeping. What I say to you, I say to everyone, watch. Do we know in the hour of Christ's second coming? No. Do we know the day of when Christ will come back again? No. We do not know. We do not know when these things will happen. And in this passage, Jesus tells us, because we do not know when the second coming is, the posture of a people prepared is watch. Throughout this passage, he uses the same word. It gets translated in two different ways in the English, bad translation. He says even be on your guard or watch. It's the same word. Verse 5, he says watch. Verse 9, be on your guard or watch. Verse 23, be on your guard, watch. Verse 33, be on your guard or watch. At the end of 34, keep watch. Beginning of 35, keep watch. At the end of 37, and the big idea that Jesus wants to communicate to us is watch, exclamation point. How do we become a people prepared? We watch. And there is so much power in watching. There is so much power. And I wrote this down. Hopefully you can go away remembering this, but here's the point. And I wrote it 3 different ways, but here's the point. What we watch for with our eyes determines how we live our lives. Isn't that true? What we watch for with our eyes, what we have vision for in the future will determine what we do in the present. What we're looking forward to in regards to what hasn't taken place yet, or the vision for our life, that vision will determine how we respond to the realities of our life today. What we watch with our eyes will determine how we live our lives. Another way to say it, whatever we see as a future possibility will shape our current reality. Another way, what we are looking forward to determines what we presently do. What we are looking forward to determines what we presently or currently do. What we watch with our eyes will determine how we live our lives. Now, this is true across the board. And the reason why it's true is it's grounded in Scripture. This is a powerful principle. And as we abide by it, it will shape us, it will form us in powerful ways. You know, if you have a nursing student and he's looking to be a nurse, he may not be very excited about all the prereqs or the general ed classes that he has to take. He may not be very excited about statistics or math or English. However, when you begin to get to anatomy, pathology, and the classes that really fit with the major, all of a sudden there's excitement. Why? Because this person has a vision of what they want to be and do. And as soon as they begin to take a class that directly influences that, it brings all sorts of motivation. What vision does for us is it gives us motivation to be faithful in the present. It shapes and determines how we act in the present. That's what vision does. Vision is powerful. It motivates us. It motivates us out of the mundane and allows us to focus our life. It changes everything. What we watch with our eyes will determine how we live our lives. When I when I dated Jana, there was my wife, the few weeks we dated before we got engaged, we had a conversation, and I found out that she loves to rollerblade. And then she asked me, do you love to rollerblade? I love rollerblade, absolutely. So then when we got engaged, a few weeks later, I went out and got rollerblades. And during that engagement, that's what we would do, is we would rollerblade. Now, why did I rollerblade? Not because I liked it, but because I loved her. And my vision of being married to her determined my present passions and the reality of my current life. I would be willing to change my current life, my present life, to fulfill the vision of being married to her. Because what we watch with our eyes will determine how we live our lives. Now, it's also true that when we got married, I never rollerbladed again. Why? Because the vision was fulfilled. What we watch with our eyes will determine how we live our lives. And that's also important if you're married. When you get married, you have this vision of what your marriage will be like, and so you engage in all sorts of premarital counseling. You read books. You do all sorts of things because you have a vision of what that marriage is to look like. But the reason why some marriages are on the rocks right now is because you've lost that vision of what your marriage is to look like. And now that marriage that was so exciting has now just become mundane. You're just going through the motions. And you're no longer farsighted in terms of the vision of what your marriage could be. You're so nearsighted and just making decisions based upon what is comfortable and convenient. Why? Because we've lost the vision. One of the hardest things about parenting is follow through. And when you first have kids, you have this vision of what they could be relationally, what they could be spiritually, intellectually, vocationally. You have this vision for their life. And they start out living, and you just shape them, and you mold them, and you make decisions, and you kind of help them out. But I tell you what, at some point along the way, if we lose our vision, we become exhausted. If we lose our vision, we lose momentum and motivation to parent our kids. We lose focus. We need to continue to keep the vision before us of what these kids are called to be in Christ Jesus. And the reason why some of you, when you first took your job, it felt like a calling, it felt like a vocation, you're excited about it, and it was a job. And now it's a job. And your friends, you're so excited about your friends because you think this is where our life is to be, and now all of a sudden it's no longer friends, it's friends. Or your life, you're so excited about life, you hit the seasons and you're just excited because you have vision for life, and now your life is just life. And it's mundane. What moves us out of the mundane is having a vision. And what Jesus says is, if you want to be a people prepared, watch. Have a vision for the second coming of Christ. And that's why Richard Baxter says this: you fetch one coal from this altar daily and see if your offering will not burn. You fetch one coal, you continue to focus on the second coming of Christ and watch your heart burn and see if it won't determine and shape the realities of your life today. It's powerful. What we watch with our eyes will determine how we live our lives. And this is also what 2 Peter says. He says, if you want to live a particular kind of life, you need to add to some things. He says, for this reason, make every effort to add to your faith goodness, knowledge, to knowledge, self-control, perseverance, godliness, and to godliness, mutual affection, and to mutual affection, love. For you possess these qualities in increasing measure, they will keep you from being ineffective and unproductive. So, how do you become ineffective? How do you keep from being ineffective and unproductive? How do you stay away from falling away from the Lord? How do you add to your faith these things? How do you become productive in your relationship with the Lord? Keep reading. But whoever does not have them is nearsighted and blind, forgetting that they have been cleansed from their past sins. What will cause sin in our life currently is if we become nearsighted and we make decisions based upon what's comfortable and convenient for today, instead of looking out to the future, that his second coming, that he is coming back again. And as a result, it will impact and determine and shape how we live our lives today. Keep your vision on the second coming of Christ. What does Jesus say? Watch. Watch. That's how we can become a people prepared. Now, I want to draw out three things. The power of what this will do. The first is that it will inspire us into holiness. When we think about the second coming of Christ and watch for it, it will inspire, the power of that is to inspire us to add to our faith self-control and goodness. And it will call us and cause us to walk a more holy life, because there's two things present here. One is the surety that Christ is coming back again. But second, we don't know when it is. Now, you bring that together, that formula is a formula for power for life transformation today. Because if we knew when he was coming back again, we'd be strongly tempted to live like however the heck we wanted until the day before he came back again. But the truth of the fact that he is coming back again, and we don't know when it is, that is a powerful formula for transformation. That's why C.S. Lewis says this in the last paragraph of his essay, The World's Last Night. He says this: we cannot always be excited. We can perhaps train ourselves to ask more and more often how the thing which we are saying or doing or failing to do at each moment will look when the irresistible light streams in upon it. What he says is, everything that you say, everything that you do, will it hold up to the irresistible light of when Jesus Christ comes back again? Just ask that of yourself. The things that you're doing now, the things that you're saying now, will they hold up to the irresistible light of Jesus Christ's second coming? That light, which is so different from the light of this world, and yet even now, we know just enough of it to take it into account. Women sometimes have the problem of trying to judge by artificial light how a dress will look by the daylight. That is very like the problem all of us have, to dress our souls, not for the electric lights of the present world, but for the daylight of the next. The good dress is the one that will face that light, for that light will last longer. I mentioned before, I've done a number of different weddings. I've never met a bride that forgot her makeup. Why? She's always looking at herself in the mirror. Why is she doing that? In preparation for meeting her groom. We evaluate ourselves, we evaluate our heart. Why? Because we are ultimately looking forward to the meeting of our groom. And the question is with the things that we do, the things that we say, will it hold up to the irresistible light of Christ's second coming? And how do we do it? We prepare by watching, keeping our eyes on Jesus. And what that will do is it will lead to holiness within our own lives. Second, forgiveness. We are called to be a people of forgiveness. Why? Because he's coming back as the King of Kings and as the judge. Now, I recognize there might be some people in here who are holding on to a grudge. That you can point to a situation where somebody got a promotion, somebody got a pay raise because they stole your idea, or they tromped on you, or they stampled on somebody else that was further down the food chain. But as a result, they took advantage of a particular situation and they got ahead. And it seemed to be, at least from our perspective, they got off scot-free. And as we look at their life, they seem to be moving up the corporate ladder. They seem to be moving up the friendship ladder. And we're still back here because we're the ones that have been hurt as a result of their direct or indirect actions. And there might be some bitterness within our own hearts. There might be a grudge that we're holding against that person. But the second coming says this, is that we have the power to relax. That we recognize that Jesus Christ is the ultimate king and that he is coming back to judge the living and the dead, and no one will get away with anything. So we can extend forgiveness because we know that the judge of the world will bring about ultimate justice. So we can not only live holy lives, but we can live lives of forgiveness. Why? Because we're watching for the coming of the King. And lastly, this is an inspiration for us to engage in mission, for us to engage in evangelism. Because we recognize that for those people who do not believe in Jesus Christ, that they will spend eternity away from God. That there's one way, there's one truth, and there's one life. And the only way to heaven is through Christ. Now, I recognize that there might be somebody who says this, that's why I have problems with Christianity, and that is why I'm not a Christian. It's because how could a loving God allow anybody not to believe in him and therefore spend eternity apart from God in hell? How could a loving God allow that? I hear that all the time, but you know what I never hear? The reason why I'm not a Christian, and the reason why I struggle with Christianity so much, is how could a loving God allow sinners to spend eternity with him? Because the reality is this, it's much more of the latter and not the former. When we look at the love of God, how could a loving God take in sinners like us? How could he love us so much that he forgives our sins for those who put their trust in him? Now, I recognize that this is a disturbing doctrine. It is disturbing. And for some of you here, this is really disturbing. I tell you what, for me, it's disturbing. But you know who it's more disturbing for? God. It was so disturbing to God that he loves us so much that he sent Jesus Christ, his one and only Son, to die on a cross for us. So for those who put their trust in him will spend everlasting life in the arms of his grace. This is what he's done. Jesus Christ is coming back again. And there is an imperative for the church to go out and to be a witness, to be evangelists, to be on mission to a lost and a broken world. And I'm not talking about being frenetic. I'm not talking about being weird. I'm talking about being urgent. Because Jesus Christ is coming back again. And the way that we prepare is to watch for him. And watching for him, it will do three things. It will call us to be holy. It will allow us to be forgiven and forgive others. And lastly, it will give us a missional imperative. And that's why we plant churches. And that's why this is so significant. We want to plant churches because we want to see new people come to know Jesus and to experience what we have experienced here. I still remember my family, and we've done some different home improvements. The first house improvement that we did, my father-in-law came out. I've never done any kind of improvement before. I'm not handy, but he's a contractor. He came out and he showed me how to do a bunch of things. And we did the first house, and then we sold that house and we moved into a second house. And I still remember the day that he came from North Dakota and he was looking at the work. And he said three words, and I'll never forget. As he looked at my work, he said, "Good job, Billy." And it was like water to my soul. Because my father-in-law had looked at me, looked at my work, and said, "Good job, Billy." There will come a day when Jesus Christ will come back in the clouds. And for those who have put their trust in Jesus, he will look to you, he will look at you face to face, and he'll say, "Well done. Good job, good and faithful servant." And that's the day that we prepare for. That's the day we watch. Because what we see with our eyes will determine how we live our lives.